So we looked at Google Sheets Quick Histogram Builder as one way to come up with a histogram, and it's pretty quick, where we have to just select our data, and then we customize the histogram bucket size, the horizontal axis, and then we add relevant titles. And I'm going to show a similar idea, but instead of the quick histogram builder, we're going to get into a little more detail by making a frequency table first. More particular, we're going to make a grouped frequency table. What's the difference between a regular frequency table and a group frequency table? Let's take a look. So my ages, in this case, I'm grouping people from 10 to 19 years old and then 20 to 29 years old. With my motor vehicles example, I just have people that have no cars, 1 car, 2 car, 3 cars. So I'm not grouping the number of cars. I'm definitely counting the students who had 1 car and the students who had 2 cars, but I'm not grouping the number of cars. So a grouped frequency histogram would be for this data, where you decide instead of having just a group of 1 number, that you would have 2 numbers grouped together. So these are the people that had 0 or 1 car, 2 or 3 cars, 4 or 5 cars, and so on. So that's the idea of grouping. Typically, we mean a group is more than 1 value. So let's just delete. Let's see, actually, we're going to do ages. That one would be more fun. So I'm going to just move this sucker out of the way, and we're going to make a new one. This time, we're going to make a frequency table first. To make a frequency table, you need to know what is the sample size. We usually call that our value for n. We need to know what's the smallest number in the data set, and we need to know what's the largest number in the data set. And sometimes we also want to know the range of values we have to deal with. So sample size, count. If the only thing in that column is the data and maybe a title and it's numerical, you can just count the whole column. I have 202 numbers in this data set. Minimum equals, there's a function called min that finds the minimum. And again, as long as it's the values you're looking for and nothing more than, say, a title in that column, it's okay to highlight the whole column. Maximum is just max. And again, if you're unsure, and Google automatically did that for me a little quicker than I wanted. If you're unsure if there's anything else in the column or you know there is, then the safe thing to do is start with the first item and drag down, or use Control-Shift-Down arrow to get to the last item. The range is just the difference between the min and the max. What is the span between those two numbers? So simply equals, take the number you already found for the max and subtract your value for the min. All right, so I have a range of 41 years that I need to split up in order to make a table of values. And one way to do that, if we look at ages versus the frequency of those ages, would be the common thing to do, whereas find people that are in their teens, and then people in their 20s, and people in their 30s, and so on. Right, so I could group by 10. Oops, got 2 of those together there. There we go. And then we just keep going that way, however far I need to go. Well, how far do you need to go? Well, for sure, I need to go into my 50s for this data set because that is the max. So I'm going to just insert another column by just dragging that over since I haven't found the frequencies yet. We're going to use what's called the frequency command. So equals frequency, and the frequency command needs to know what's the data and what are your classes. Now, my classes are teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s, but the spreadsheet can't just look at those words and guess which numbers I mean. There's some AI that can do that, but this can't. So in a spreadsheet program, what it wants to know is what's the largest acceptable number for each class. That's what it means by classes. So here, let's get rid of that. I need a column for my classes. And it's really, when they say classes, what they mean are class maximums. So in the first group, I meant my class maximum to be 19 was the largest acceptable number. For that group, 29 was the next largest acceptable number, and so on. 39, 49. And again, once you establish the first pair, you can just highlight and then fill down that pattern and continue it for as far as you need to. I only need to go up to 59. Now, the max is 58, so why didn't I stop there? Well, technically for a grouped frequency histogram, you want each group to be the same width of numbers. Okay, so what do I mean by 19? I'm calling it teens here. What does teens really mean? It means grab any age from 10 to 19. What do my 20s mean? That means grab any age that is from 20 to 29. Okay, is that the only way to group this data? No, there's lots of ways. Okay, once you establish what your class maximums are, then you can use the frequency command. So the frequency command is just called frequency, and it wants all of your data. Since that's all that's in that column, I can select the column, comma, and then it wants just the class maximums. Close your parentheses, hit enter, and it will then count. And now really what's happening here for this frequency, let's say X is any age, it's calculating X that is less than or equal to 19. So if I put somebody in there that was 0, it's going to get, or 1 or 2 or 3, that's going to get counted in this column here, even though this is what I meant it to calculate. On the other hand, notice it gave me this extra number. So the frequency command always double checks to see, is there anything above what you said the largest number was? So it's always going to do a check to see if there's any number that is greater than what you said the maximum number was for the last grouping. In between, for like this one right here, what's happening is that X value is certainly going to be less than 39, but it's also, oops, going to grab it's going to grab X values that are also greater than or equal to 29, or sorry, greater than 29, less than or equal to 39 is the way this works. So again, reading from the variable, what the frequency command is doing, since the previous max was 29, for the next column, it's going to say anything that's greater than 29. So if there was a 29.5, that's going to get counted in this next group here. And it's going to do that all the way up to including 39. So if somebody's age was exactly in 39, they'd be in this group right here. So that's different than the way the histogram builder works. Histogram builder, the lower number is in that group. The frequency command, the upper number is in that group. They don't match the way they're made. So something to keep in mind. If I were to graph these two, I should get a similar histogram to what I see below. It made a pie chart. Okay, now should I make a histogram here? The answer is no. What I want to do is make a column chart. So a histogram option for a graph is when you have raw data and you want the computer to group for you. If you group the raw data in a frequency table, you're just making a column chart based on that frequency table. Right? So that's the approach this time. One problem here is it said this column is called 19, this column is called 29, this column is called 39, that's 49, that's 59. That is a slight misrepresentation, but those 29s, 39s, and so on are necessary to use the frequency function. So I delete that. So what I usually have is another column that is a more descriptive version of that. So I'm either going to type something like a phrase like teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, or I'm going to type something like this would be 10 to 19. This one would be 19 to, it would be, sorry, 20 to 29. And this one would be 30 to 39, and so on. And then that's what I would graph. So I would choose that column once I'm done typing. If you want to select a column that's not adjacent, make your first selection, then hold Control and make your second selection. And that will graph those two together. And if it doesn't pick right, you want a column chart. And then I can get whatever labels I want on the bottom there to go with my frequencies. And I can change my title, and I can change my label on the y-axis and so on. Check sure I can do better than those labels. All right, so in summary, we're using the frequency command. And the frequency command to make a group frequency table it needs to know where is the raw data, and then it wants a column of group maxes. Group max list. And then based on that list of group maxes and the data, it will then count out whatever, all the values that are in each group. So then we'll end up with a column of frequencies based on a column of group maxes. Let's try that one more time on a different data set, and then we do a bar chart based on that. Let's take the motor vehicle data. So that was the quick version of the histogram. I'm going to make a frequency table here. Frequency table needs the, in this case, I could call them vehicles. And I want to find my frequencies. And this one, it makes sense to have a 0 group and a 1 group and a 2 group. And then I would just continue that pattern to get as many as I need. That means I ought to find the max here. So I need to take this one farther. And then do the frequency count. I just say equals frequency. Select my data, comma, select only the maximum acceptable value for each group in that column. Notice I didn't select the title there. And then close parentheses and hit enter. And it's always going to do that double check. Is there anything bigger than what you thought was the biggest number? Which is good. And it is a column chart based on a frequency table is the technical definition of a histogram. Sometimes it guesses the wrong graph. So here I want to say, make me a column chart. And it's trying to graph the numbers and the frequencies separately. So notice it's trying to graph the frequency table. Let's see, what did it do wrong there? It's trying to graph column D and column E. So I'm going to get rid of this. And then the x-axis, that is column D. It's calling frequency table for some reason. And then let's see, use row 1 as headers. That's the first row I highlighted there, sure. So there's my, how many people had 0 cars, 1 car, 2 car, 3 cars. Other differences between the column chart and the histogram chart. The histogram, they're wider and they extend to the endpoints on each side. With the frequency table bar chart, you have to make sure you select proper values to label each column. And sometimes that is simple. So I could just add, in this case, title on the bottom, the horizontal axis, number of vehicles to explain those numbers. And it's a 0, a 1, or a 2. But sometimes it's more complicated where we have ranges of ages like 10 to 19 or 20 to 29. Okay, so histogram making is an art. What's the best width for your data? It depends. What's the best number of columns? It depends. You just got to play around with the many different options.